The Galactic Council had always been a symbol of power and control across the stars. For centuries, it had maintained peace between the countless species that populated the galaxy. Their mission was simple: ensure the survival of all, with no wars or conflicts that could tear the galaxy apart. But when the humans appeared, everything started to change. At first, they were just a small blip on the Council's radar, a lone ship moving toward the central planet. The Council assumed it was just another diplomatic mission. After all, humanity was a young species, new to space travel, and not particularly feared by the others. But no one knew that this single human ship would mark the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of the entire galaxy. The ship, a small, sleek vessel, was not impressive compared to the grand fleets of the Council. It was far from the might of the ancient civilizations that sat on the high councils. Yet it was the one ship that made every council member pause for a moment. They had expected peaceful greetings, simple talks, a few exchanged pleasantries, and then they would be on their way, leaving the council members to continue their endless debates. But instead, there was an air of anticipation around the ship. It was like something was coming, something big. No one could put their finger on it, but a feeling of dread began to spread among the council's ranks. As the human ship drew closer, the council's leaders gathered in the grand hall of their meeting place. The room was large, filled with species from all corners of the galaxy, some humanoid, some not. They were all well aware of the new humans who had recently started to explore the stars, but none of them saw them as a true threat. The humans were just another species to be included in the galaxy's expanding fold. They had learned a few things, sent out some probes, and now they were ready to interact with the greater galactic community. At least that was what the Council believed. When the human ship landed on the Council's central planet, there was a sense of normalcy. The Council had seen this sort of thing before. They had met countless species who had made their first journey into galactic diplomacy. Most were nervous, respectful, and eager to please. They wanted to show they were capable of joining the larger galactic society. They all thought they would have to prove their worth. The humans, however, had no such plans. They didn't come to beg for acceptance. They came to be heard. A single human officer stepped off the ship. He was a tall man, dressed in the simplest of uniforms. His clothes were nothing special, no extravagant displays of wealth or status, just a basic military uniform. His gaze, however, was intense, his eyes sharp and unwavering as he faced the members of the Galactic Council. There was no fear in him, no hesitation. The council members, most of whom were used to seeing the shivering, nervous arrivals of new species, were taken aback by his confidence. This human wasn't here to impress them with fancy gestures. He was here with one purpose, and it was clear that he would not tolerate anything less than respect. "Greetings," the human officer said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that none of the council had expected. "I am Captain James Donovan, representing the people of Earth. We are here to speak with you, not as a beggar asking for permission, but as a species claiming its rightful place in the galaxy." The words echoed through the large hall. There was a pause, a stunned silence. The council had never heard anything like this before. Other species, when they met the council, often started with words of gratitude or subservience, grateful to be included in the grand community. Humans, however, came with no such pleasantries. It was almost as if they believed they deserved a seat at the table, not because they were newcomers, but because they had earned it. The council leaders exchanged glances. They had been expecting a message of peace, a plea for cooperation, maybe even an offering of resources. Instead, they got a challenge. The humans weren't interested in diplomacy the way the council understood it. They didn't want to offer gifts or tokens of submission. They wanted respect. They wanted to be treated as equals. And the council, for the first time in centuries, didn't know how to respond. One of the council members, a tall reptilian species with an air of superiority, stood up. "What makes you think you deserve such a place among us?" he demanded, his voice cold and dismissive. Your people are still young in the ways of space. You have barely begun to explore the stars. What can you offer us? Why should we treat you as an equal? The human officer met his gaze without flinching. Because we're more than just explorers. We're survivors. Earth has seen war, devastation, and destruction that would have wiped out most civilizations. And yet, we still stand. We've fought battles you can't even imagine, and we've won. We didn't get to where we are by waiting for permission or asking for handouts. We earned our place, and we've come to show you that we are more than capable of standing beside you, or against you. The words were sharp, cutting through the silence in the room like a blade. The council was caught off guard. They had assumed that the humans would be meek, eager to please, afraid of offending their betters. Instead, they faced a species that seemed ready to take on anyone who stood in their way. For the first time, the council leaders began to wonder if they had made a mistake by not taking humanity seriously earlier. Whispers filled the room as the alien species began to murmur among themselves. The human officer didn't back down. He stood tall, his eyes scanning the room, assessing each of the council members one by one. It was clear now that he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Humanity wasn't here to beg. They weren't here to ask for permission. They were here to stake their claim. "We don't have time for the games you play," Donovan continued. "The galaxy is changing, and you're either going to change with it, or you're going to be left behind. You may think you're the rulers of the galaxy, but you don't understand what we've been through. We didn't get here by playing nice with others. We got here by being tough, by being resilient, and we're ready to show you what that means." The council was stunned into silence. They had never encountered a species like this. They were used to dealing with species that sought their favor, who saw the Galactic Council as a symbol of power and authority. But humanity didn't see them that way. They saw them as just another obstacle, one that could be overcome if necessary. The tension in the room grew thick, almost suffocating. The council didn't know what to do. They had expected a polite introduction, a mutual exchange of pleasantries, and maybe some trade agreements. But the humans had brought something much more dangerous: confidence. And that confidence was shaking the foundation of everything the council thought it knew about the galaxy. As the silence stretched on, the human officer took a step forward. "We're not here to fight. Not yet. But if you push us, you'll find that humans don't back down. We don't kneel to anyone. And if you think we're just a passing curiosity, you're gravely mistaken. We are here to stay." With that, Donovan turned and walked back toward the exit. He didn't need to say anything more. The message had been delivered, and the Galactic Council, once so sure of their position, was left with a feeling they had never known before: fear. The human presence had changed everything, and no one knew what would happen next. The Galactic Council was in a state of shock after the human officer's bold statement. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with uncertainty. The members, once so confident in their control over the galaxy, now felt the weight of something they had never anticipated. A species, young in galactic terms, had just come to their doorstep and demanded respect, not through force, but through sheer presence and confidence. The Council had always prided itself on diplomacy, on maintaining peace by managing the galaxy's many species with careful balance. But humanity, it seemed, was different. They weren't interested in playing by the Council's rules. In the hours that followed, the Council debated what to do. Should they reach out again with offers of diplomacy, or should they prepare for the inevitable conflict that seemed to be brewing? The reptilian species that had been the first to speak against the humans now pushed for a stronger stance. "We cannot let this human arrogance go unanswered," he hissed, his voice filled with contempt. "They think they can walk in here and dictate terms to us. We've ruled the galaxy for millennia, and we will not be threatened by a primitive species." But not all the council members agreed. A member from a peaceful, telepathic species, who had remained quiet during the human officer's speech, now spoke up. "We must understand them first. They are new to this, yes, but they have shown us that they are not to be underestimated. Perhaps we can learn something from them." His words were met with skepticism, but his plea for caution carried weight. The Galactic Council had always been careful in its dealings with new species, but humanity's sudden challenge had caught them off guard. They weren't prepared for this. The human officer's words, so simple yet powerful, echoed in their minds. "We didn't get here by playing nice with others. We got here by being tough, by being resilient." After much debate, the council decided to extend an olive branch, but they were not prepared to back down completely. A meeting was arranged, and this time, the humans would be joined by a full delegation of the council's top representatives. The council's leaders wanted to reassert their authority, to remind the humans who truly held power in the galaxy. But deep down, they knew they could not afford to let things escalate too quickly. The fear they felt now was something they had never experienced before, and it made them wary of what the humans might be capable of. The next day, the human ship returned to the Council's central planet. This time, the delegation was not just one officer but a team of humans, each one wearing the same calm, determined expression as Captain Donovan. There was no sign of fear, no hesitation in their movements. They stepped off their ship and into the meeting hall with the same confidence as the day before. The human leader, Donovan, addressed the council again, his voice unwavering. "We didn't come here to threaten you," he began. "We came here to speak, to be heard, to join the galactic community, not as subordinates, but as equals. We've made our way to this point on our own, and we have no intention of following anyone else's lead. But we're willing to talk." The council members exchanged glances. This wasn't the tone they had expected. They had hoped the humans would soften, that their fear of the unknown would force them to beg for acceptance. Instead, they found themselves in the uncomfortable position of negotiating with a species that didn't fear them. The reptilian representative from earlier stood up again, clearly agitated. "You come here, making demands, and expect us to just accept them. You are insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. What could you possibly offer that would be of value to us?" Donovan's gaze never wavered. "You think we are insignificant because we haven't been around as long as you. But that's exactly why you're making a mistake. We come from a world that has had to fight for everything. We don't wait for permission, and we don't ask for favors. We take what we need, and we defend what's ours. If you don't believe me, look at Earth's history. We've fought wars that should have wiped us out. We've overcome natural disasters that would have ended other civilizations. And we still stand." There was a collective shift in the room. The other species in the council, many of them ancient and powerful, began to feel a shift in the dynamic. They were used to being the ones in control, to being the ones who dictated the terms. But humanity, with its resilience and defiance, was quickly making them feel like they were the ones on the back foot. The peaceful telepathic representative spoke again, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of concern. "Perhaps we should listen to them. Earth has faced more hardship than any of us can truly understand. They have survived against the odds. It is a strength we cannot ignore." The reptilian species sneered. "Survival? You call that a strength? A species that has survived nothing but their own destruction. It's a weakness. They are a danger." But Donovan cut him off. "Surviving isn't a weakness. It's proof that we can adapt, that we can fight. And we will continue to do so, whether you like it or not." The room fell silent again. For the first time, the council members found themselves questioning everything they had known. The humans were not just another species to be swept aside. They were a force to be reckoned with. Their words had power, and their strength was undeniable. The idea that this small, young species could come to the table and challenge them so boldly made many of the council members uneasy. As the meeting continued, the council members realized that humanity's presence was not just a disruption. It was a warning. The humans were here to stay, and they would not be controlled or manipulated. The council would have to find a way to deal with them, to understand them, and maybe even to work with them. But the one thing the Council could no longer do was underestimate humanity. The talks went on for hours, but despite the tension, no agreement was reached. The human delegation made it clear that they would not back down from their position. They did not want to fight, but they were more than ready to defend their place in the galaxy. The Council, for the first time in centuries, was faced with a species that was not afraid of them. The meeting ended without resolution, but the impact of the human presence was clear. The galaxy had just been reminded that no matter how old or powerful a species might be, there were always forces they could not control. As the human ship left the Council's central planet, the members of the Council were left to wonder what the future would hold. They had expected another routine diplomatic exchange, but instead, they had encountered a species that would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. And as the humans departed, they knew that this was only the beginning. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on maintaining the balance of power, carefully negotiating with species across the galaxy to ensure peace. But humanity's unexpected arrival had thrown everything off course. What had started as a routine diplomatic mission had turned into a full-blown crisis of confidence. The Council members were still trying to process what had happened in that meeting. The audacity of the humans, their refusal to bow to the Council's long-standing authority, had shaken the foundation of everything they believed in. Behind closed doors, the Council convened again. This time, however, it was not about diplomacy. It was about survival. Could they afford to ignore the humans and continue as they always had, or had humanity become a force too powerful to ignore? It was a question none of the Council members had ever considered before. Some were still in denial, convinced that the humans were just a passing threat that could be easily dealt with. But others knew better. The more they thought about the encounter, the more they realized that humanity's survival instincts were not just a survival tactic. They were an entire way of life. These humans, they realized, would not be like other species who simply sought to coexist. They would fight, and they would fight to win. Across the galaxy, humanity's reputation began to spread. News of the encounter with the Galactic Council reached the farthest corners of the universe, and it sparked something deep within the minds of other species. Some saw the humans as a threat, something to be wiped out before they could grow too powerful. Others saw them as a challenge, a species with the potential to change the balance of power in the galaxy. But no matter the viewpoint, one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer just a small, insignificant species. They were a force to be reckoned with. Back on Earth, Captain Donovan and his team returned to their home planet. The mission had not gone as expected, but it had been successful in its own way. Donovan had hoped to secure a place for humanity among the galactic community, but what he had gotten instead was something far more valuable: respect. The Galactic Council may not have welcomed humanity with open arms, but they had certainly learned to fear them. As Donovan stood on the tarmac, watching the ship's engines cool, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The humans had been in the galaxy for less than a year, and already they had left a mark. He had known that Earth had a history of overcoming insurmountable odds, but even he hadn't anticipated the level of impact they would have in such a short time. "What now?" a voice asked from behind him. It was his second-in-command, Lieutenant Aria. She had been with him since the beginning, ever since the first human ship had broken through the atmosphere and made contact with the alien species that had initially discovered Earth. She was quiet but always had a sharp mind for strategy. "We wait," Donovan replied. "We wait and see what the Council does next. But I suspect they will try something. They can't just let us go unchecked." "Do you think they'll attack?" Aria asked, her brow furrowed. "I don't know," Donovan admitted. "I don't think they will. Not yet. But it wouldn't surprise me if they send someone to test us, to see if we really are as dangerous as we seem. The Council doesn't take threats lightly." Aria nodded, and for a moment, the two of them stood in silence. The world around them was quiet, almost peaceful, but there was an undercurrent of tension. The galaxy was watching them now, and that meant Earth would have to be ready. No one had prepared humanity for this. There had been no training, no instruction on how to navigate the complexities of galactic politics. But Earth had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how overwhelming it seemed. Back in the council chambers, the debate raged on. The reptilian representative, who had been so vehemently opposed to the humans' arrival, now found himself standing alone. His colleagues, who had once agreed with him, were beginning to shift their stance. The telepathic species, in particular, was adamant that the humans should not be treated as enemies. They had shown no signs of aggression, only strength and determination. Their survival instinct, while intimidating, was also a sign of something rare in the galaxy, an unyielding will to survive. The reptilian growled in frustration, unable to accept the fact that the Council could not simply wipe humanity from existence. "We cannot let this continue," he spat. "They are too dangerous. We must act now, before they become an even greater threat." But the voice of reason, once again, came from the telepathic species. "We have seen what they are capable of, and we have seen how they deal with threats. They are not like other species. They are different. It may be that humanity is the one thing we have never encountered before, a species with the potential to outlast us all." The reptilian snarled but fell silent. He knew, deep down, that the telepathic species was right. Humanity was unlike anything they had ever faced. The Council could no longer pretend they could control the humans. The galaxy was shifting, and Earth was becoming a central player in the grand scheme of things. As the Council meeting came to a close, the decision was made. They would not make any immediate moves against humanity, but they would watch them closely. They would test them, find out what made them tick. And if the humans truly were as powerful as they seemed, the Council would have no choice but to recognize them as equals. But for now, the galaxy held its breath, waiting for humanity's next move. Back on Earth, Captain Donovan stood looking up at the stars. The galaxy had just been introduced to the resilience of humankind, and though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity had proven that they were no longer just another species. They were a force to be reckoned with, and no one could ignore them any longer. The Galactic Council had underestimated them once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Weeks passed, and the tension in the galaxy grew. The Galactic Council, having decided to wait and observe humanity, began to carefully monitor Earth's activities. The Council's fear and curiosity about the humans were palpable. They could not afford to ignore such a powerful and unpredictable species, especially now that humanity had shown itself to be both resourceful and unyielding. But despite their concerns, they were hesitant to take any direct action. The last thing they wanted was to provoke a war with a species that could potentially overpower them. On Earth, life seemed to return to normal. Captain Donovan and his crew resumed their duties, preparing for whatever might come next. Earth's leaders, though still wary, were cautiously optimistic. The humans had made their point to the Council. They were not a species to be underestimated. But the real question was, what would the Council do next? Humanity, however, had not been sitting idle. Even as they went about their daily lives, they continued to prepare. The Earth's space fleets were growing, and new technologies were being developed at an astonishing rate. The scientists and military strategists back on Earth had been hard at work, understanding the technology the humans had encountered during their brief interaction with the Galactic Council, learning what they could from the advanced alien species. Earth was not just waiting. They were evolving, preparing for whatever the Council might throw at them. While Donovan and his crew were working with the Earth's leaders, a new development emerged. The Council, in their attempts to understand the humans, had sent an emissary, a neutral third-party species tasked with investigating humanity's true potential. The emissary's goal was to gather information without causing further conflict, but it was clear to Donovan that this was not a friendly gesture. The Council was still assessing humanity, trying to figure out how dangerous they really were. The emissary arrived on Earth, and Donovan was called to oversee the first meeting. The representative was from a species known as the Elorian, a race of peaceful, ancient beings who had served the Council for centuries. They were known for their diplomatic skill and their ability to understand different cultures. The Elorian representative, a being named Clor, was serene in appearance, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air as he approached Donovan. "We come not to challenge you, but to understand," Clor said, his voice calm and measured. "The Galactic Council has sent me to observe, to learn about your people and your way of life. We must know more before we can determine how to proceed." Donovan studied Clor carefully, reading between the lines of his words. He was a diplomat through and through, but there was a subtle edge to his message, an underlying threat. The Council still did not trust humanity, and they had sent their best diplomat to determine just how much humanity could withstand. Donovan could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a test. The Council wanted to see if humanity would buckle under pressure, or if they would hold their ground. "We are open to understanding each other," Donovan replied, his voice steady. "But let me be clear. Humanity will not be cowed. We will not simply bend to the will of the Council or any other power. We will stand tall, as we always have." Clor nodded, though it was hard to read his expression. "That is understood, but your strength will be tested. The galaxy is not so simple, and your survival depends on much more than just the will to fight. There are forces in the galaxy that you have never encountered, forces far beyond your understanding." Donovan's eyes narrowed. "And we'll be ready for them." For the next several days, Clor met with various leaders and military commanders on Earth. He asked questions, observed humanity's strengths, and assessed their weaknesses. It became clear to Donovan that the Elorian emissary was doing more than just gathering information. He was gauging how humanity would react under pressure, measuring their responses to situations that were designed to provoke a reaction. As the days wore on, Clor's questions became more pointed. He wanted to know about humanity's military capabilities, their history of warfare, and their ability to form alliances. Donovan began to sense a growing unease in Clor. It wasn't just about the human military or their technology. It was about the humans themselves, about their tenacity, their unwillingness to submit, and their sheer determination to survive at all costs. The Elorian representative had seen many species in his time, but he had never encountered one quite like humanity. There was something fundamentally different about them, something that made them a wild card in the galaxy's complex political landscape. Despite his growing concerns, Clor's reports to the Council remained diplomatic. He had yet to reveal his true feelings, but it was becoming clear to him that the Galactic Council's fear of humanity was not misplaced. The more he observed, the more he realized that humanity was a species that had already been through the worst and come out stronger. They had survived wars, natural disasters, and conflicts that had wiped out other civilizations. But more than that, they had built something that no other species had, a world where they worked together despite their differences, united by their will to survive and thrive. As the emissary prepared to leave Earth, he met with Donovan one final time. This time, the air between them was charged with unspoken tension. "You are a remarkable species, Captain," Clor said, his voice carrying the weight of his own realization. "I had hoped that we might find a way to live in peace, but now I see that the galaxy may not be ready for you. Humanity's strength is undeniable. It is not just in your technology or your military power. It is in your spirit, and that is what makes you dangerous." Donovan's response was simple. "We're not dangerous because we want to be. We're dangerous because we have no choice but to be. You've seen what happens when you push humanity too far." Clor nodded. "Yes, I have seen. And the Council will have to decide what to do next. I fear that we are entering a new era in the galaxy, one where humanity will be a force that no one can ignore." As Clor left Earth, Donovan stood at the edge of the landing platform, watching the Elorian ship vanish into the stars. The meeting with the emissary had confirmed what he had suspected all along. The Galactic Council was afraid of humanity, not because they were a threat to the galaxy, but because they had the potential to change everything. They were a force that the galaxy had never seen before, and the Council's carefully crafted balance of power was now at risk. Humanity had become a wild card, a species that could not be controlled, but one that would never be easily defeated. And in that moment, Donovan understood the true weight of humanity's presence in the galaxy. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reshaping the galaxy itself. The Council's hesitation had already cost them, and soon they would be forced to recognize humanity as an equal. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was whether the galaxy would be ready for what was coming next. The tension in the galaxy had reached a breaking point. News of humanity's growing strength spread far and wide, reaching planets and species that had never heard of Earth before. Some saw it as a beacon of hope, a new power to rival the long-standing control of the Galactic Council. Others, though, viewed humanity as a threat, something that needed to be extinguished before it could become too powerful. In the midst of this, the Galactic Council convened once more, but this time, there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. The leaders of the various species within the Council knew that they could no longer ignore humanity. They could not afford to underestimate them any longer. The questions were now clear. What would humanity do next? Would they rise up and challenge the established order? Or would they retreat, content with their place on Earth? For the first time in millennia, the Council was uncertain about how to proceed. The galaxy's balance of power was shifting, and humanity was at the center of it. On Earth, the atmosphere was equally tense. Captain Donovan and his team had returned from their last meeting with the Elorian emissary, and they knew that something had changed. The Council was watching them closely, and there was no way to predict what the next move would be. Donovan could feel it in his bones, the weight of the galaxy's gaze upon Earth. The days of diplomacy were over. It was only a matter of time before the Council made its move. Then, unexpectedly, a message arrived. It was not from the Galactic Council, but from a small, unknown faction of alien species that had been quietly watching humanity's rise. They called themselves the Consortium of Free Worlds, a loose alliance of species who rejected the Council's rule and sought to find their place outside its influence. The Consortium had its own vision for the future, and it saw humanity as the key to achieving it. They offered an alliance, a chance for humanity to join their ranks and rise above the Galactic Council's control. Donovan knew that this was not a decision to be taken lightly. The offer was tempting, but it came with risks. Aligning with the Consortium would mean turning against the Galactic Council, and that could lead to war. But on the other hand, joining the Consortium could give humanity the chance to build its own future, free from the restrictions imposed by the Council. It was an offer that would change everything for Earth. As Donovan deliberated, word came that the Galactic Council was about to make its move. The time for diplomacy was over. The Council had decided that humanity's strength needed to be tested, and they would not allow a species like humanity to exist outside their control. The decision was made. Humanity would face a trial, a test to determine if they could be trusted within the galaxy or if they were too dangerous to be left unchecked. The trial would take place on the neutral planet of Andros, a world that had served as a battleground for many species in the past. It was a place where the Council had decided that humanity's future would be decided once and for all. Captain Donovan was called upon to lead a human delegation to Andros, where they would face whatever challenges the Council had prepared for them. The journey to Andros was long and uncertain. As they approached the planet, Donovan's crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The trial was not meant to be fair. It was meant to force humanity into a corner and see how they would react. But Donovan was determined not to let that happen. He knew that humanity's survival instincts would carry them through. They would not be tested and broken by the Council. If the galaxy wanted a challenge, humanity would give them one. Upon landing on Andros, Donovan and his team were met by a delegation from the Galactic Council. The representatives were silent and stern, their faces unreadable. The trial was about to begin. The first challenge was a series of tests designed to push humanity to its limits. They would face trials of strength, intelligence, and diplomacy. Tests that were meant to measure the very essence of what made humanity tick. The goal was clear: prove that humanity could be trusted, or prove that they were a threat that needed to be eliminated. At first, the trials seemed straightforward. A test of endurance, where Donovan and his team had to navigate a maze filled with obstacles designed to test their physical limits. Another test required them to solve complex puzzles, designed to challenge their intellectual capabilities. And then there was the test of diplomacy, a meeting with representatives from multiple alien species, where humanity would have to negotiate peace and cooperation in a tense and hostile environment. Each trial, however, revealed something more about humanity. As Donovan and his crew faced the tests, they demonstrated an unyielding determination to succeed. The human spirit, so often underestimated by the galaxy's powers, proved to be more than enough. They didn't just endure the challenges, they excelled at them. Even when it seemed like they were being pushed to their breaking points, they adapted and overcame every obstacle. The final test was the most dangerous, a trial of combat. Donovan and his team would have to face off against some of the most skilled warriors in the galaxy, beings from species that had fought in countless wars. The test was meant to see if humanity could handle conflict on a galactic scale, to determine if they were a threat that needed to be controlled, or a species that could stand as an equal. As the battle began, the human warriors fought with a ferocity that took their alien opponents by surprise. They were not the strongest, nor the most skilled, but they had something no other species could match: an unbreakable will to survive. As the battle raged on, it became clear that humanity was not to be underestimated. They fought not just for victory, but for their future. In the end, the Galactic Council had no choice but to recognize humanity's strength. They had passed the trials, and in doing so, they had proven that they were more than just a fledgling species. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Council had been forced to admit that humanity was not a threat, but a challenge they could not ignore. As the trial came to an end, the representatives of the Galactic Council met with Donovan one last time. There was no more fear in their eyes, only a grudging respect. The galaxy had changed forever, and humanity had changed the rules. "We underestimated you," one of the council members admitted, his voice reluctant but honest. "And now we must accept that humanity is a force in the galaxy that cannot be ignored." Donovan nodded, his expression determined. "Humanity is here to stay. We'll stand on our own terms, and we will change the galaxy. No one can stop us now." And with that, the era of humanity's quiet survival in the galaxy came to an end. The Galactic Council had been forced to acknowledge the truth. Humanity was not just another species. They were a new power, a force that had come to reshape the stars. And with that knowledge, humanity prepared to take its place as a dominant force in the galaxy, ready to rise, ready to conquer, and ready to change the future forever.